I died on a Tuesday. The concrete was cold beneath my back. Blood pooled around my head, warm, then cooling fast. I could hear her laughing. That sound. It followed me into the dark. Rose. Perfume. That was the last thing I smelled. Sweet. Heavy. Wrong. It clung to the balcony railing above me. It clung to Celeste's wrist as she leaned over to look. She wasn't checking if I was alive. She was checking if I was dead enough. Then nothing. Then everything again. I woke up gasping, in a bed that smelled like fabric softener and old money. Sunlight cut through lace curtains. My hands were young. No scars. No broken fingers. I sat up so fast the room spun. There was one thing I didn't understand yet. But I would. Soon enough. The date on my phone made my stomach drop. 3 years before the balcony. 3 years before the wedding that killed me. I was 17 again, in my father's house, with my whole ruined future still ahead of me, and this time, I knew every step of it. I could hear the house waking up. Water running 2 rooms over. A door closing softly, the way Celeste always closed doors, like she was afraid of being caught doing anything at all. Downstairs, someone was frying bacon. The smell drifted up, mixing with the lemon polish on the banister. Nothing here had betrayed me yet. That was the strange part. Everyone still looked innocent. I knew better. My father, Warren Hale, was dying slower than anyone realized. I knew that too. The cancer wouldn't show itself for another 8 months. He'd hide it from everyone except his lawyer. And Celeste, my stepsister, would use that silence like a knife. Last time, I hadn't seen any of it coming. This time, I intended to build the trap myself. I got dressed slowly, buttoning a blouse with hands that didn't shake. In the mirror, I looked exactly like the girl who used to trust people. That girl was gone. I just hadn't told my face yet. Downstairs, Celeste was already at the table, spooning sugar into her tea. Her hair was down, soft and gold, catalog perfect. She looked up and smiled the way she always smiled at me, warm on the surface, calculating underneath. "You're up early," she said. "Big day. Dad's announcing the foundation transfer." "Is he?" I said. Flat. Like I hadn't been waiting 3 years to hear it again. She studied me for a second too long. "You okay? You look pale." "I'm fine," I said. "Just tired." I wasn't tired. I was patient. There's a difference. And she would learn it eventually. My father's foundation was the crown jewel of the Hale name, a charity built on his father's steel money, worth more in reputation than in actual cash. Everyone in this city wanted a seat on its board. Celeste wanted to run it. I remembered exactly how she got there. Last time, I fought her for it. I lost the fight, then lost my life for losing it. This time, I wasn't going to fight her for anything. At breakfast, my father cleared his throat the way he always did before something important. He set down his coffee cup. It clinked against the saucer, sharp, final, like a gavel. "I've decided," he said, "to name a co-director for the foundation. Someone younger. Someone the donors will trust for the next 50 years. Celeste sat up straighter. I watched her hands go still on the table. "I want it to be you, Celeste," he said. "Ivy has other interests." I felt Celeste's eyes cut toward me, waiting for the explosion. Last time, there had been one. I'd cried. I'd argued. I'd told him it wasn't fair. This time, I just nodded. "That's a good choice," I said. "She's better with people than I am." The silence that followed was almost funny. My father blinked, caught off guard by how easy it was. Celeste's smile faltered for exactly 1 second before it came back. Brighter. More careful. She didn't know it yet. But she'd just taken her first step into a structure I'd already built in my head, 3 years and 1 death ago. Later that week, there was someone else my father wanted us to meet. A man named Julian Vance, 31, sharp-suited, heir to a shipping fortune that had somehow tripled in 5 years. Too fast. Too clean. I remembered that detail clearly. Because it was the detail that eventually got me killed. He walked into the drawing room like he owned the air in it. Sandalwood cologne, thick and warm, hit me before he even crossed the threshold. It hit me like a fist to the chest. I kept my face still. I'd had 3 years of practice not flinching at that smell, even in dreams. "Ivy Hale," he said, taking my hand. His grip was warm, controlled, exact. "Your father talks about you like you're made of glass." "He's wrong," I said. "I don't break that easy." Something flickered behind his eyes, interest, maybe, or calculation. In my last life, that flicker had felt like being chosen. This time, it felt like watching a snake decide whether you were worth the venom. Celeste watched us from the doorway, arms crossed, rose perfume trailing behind her like a warning she didn't know she was giving. I already knew what Julian Vance really was. Underneath the shipping company, underneath the charity dinners and the watch that cost more than most people's houses, there was a machine built to launder money for men who didn't officially exist. I knew because in my last life. I found out too late, and the finding out was what got me thrown off that balcony. This time, I wasn't going to find out. I was going to use it. Over the next few weeks, Julian came around often. He brought flowers I didn't want, jewelry I didn't wear, and questions about my father's business dressed up as small talk. He was patient. He was thorough. He was, I knew, exactly the kind of trap Celeste couldn't resist. I started distancing myself. Small things first. Cancelled dinners. Cool replies. I let him see disinterest instead of fear. Celeste noticed immediately. She always noticed anything that looked like an opening. "You don't like him," she said one night, catching me in the hallway. Her perfume arrived before she did, the way it always would, for the rest of both our lives. "I don't dislike him," I said. "I just don't need him." Her eyes lit up at that, hungry, careful, delighted. "You don't need him," she repeated slowly. "Interesting." I smiled and said nothing else. Some traps don't need bait. They just need patience. 3 days later, my father called us both into his study. Old leather chairs, the smell of pipe tobacco long since banned from the house but still soaked into the walls. He folded his hands on the desk. "Julian's asked for permission to court one of you seriously," he said. "Formally. Possibly toward marriage." Celeste's chin lifted before he even finished the sentence. "I assumed it would be Ivy," my father added, glancing at me. "But given how things have gone." "I'm not interested," I said, cutting him off gently. "Truly. Let Celeste have him, if she wants him." The room went quiet in a very specific way. My father blinked, surprised again. The way he'd been surprised at breakfast. Celeste's mouth opened slightly, like she couldn't believe her luck. She had no idea what she was agreeing to. "You're sure?" my father asked me. "Completely," I said. "I have other plans for my life." That was true. More than he could ever know. Celeste didn't wait for me to change my mind. Within a week, she was on Julian's arm at every event that mattered. Within a month, there was a ring square cut, cold, heavier than it looked. I remembered that ring. It used to be mine, in another version of this life, on a hand that stopped moving on a marble balcony floor. Watching her where it should have hurt. It didn't. It felt like watching someone walk calmly into a house that was already on fire, just not yet visible. That night, alone in my room, I made one phone call. Just one. To a number I had memorized in my previous life, whispered to me once by a man who never got the chance to use it against Julian himself. The line picked up on the second ring. "Agent Boone," a voice said. "You don't bag yet," I said quietly. "But you will need to." He didn't hang up. That told me everything. The contract on my father's foundation transfer would finalize in 90 days. That was the deadline. I remembered the exact night, 3 years from now, that everything had once collapsed. I intended to make sure it collapsed sooner, and on my terms this time. 90 days. I wrote the number on the inside of my wrist in pen, then washed it off before anyone could ask. There are things you do quietly, so no one understands their meaning until it's far too late to stop them. That was mine. Celeste's engagement party filled the ballroom with candlelight and old money. Crystal chandeliers threw gold across the marble floor. Waiters moved like ghosts, trays balanced, silent shoes on stone. I stood near the wall, watching her laugh too loud at something Julian said. His hand rested at the small of her back proprietary. Practiced. The same way it used to rest on mine. She caught my eye across the room and raised her glass. A small, private toast. To winning. I raised mine back. She had no idea I was watching for something else entirely. The band shifted into something slower. Julian pulled Celeste onto the floor, and for a moment they looked like the picture on a magazine cover: golden couple, golden future, not a crack in sight. I knew where the cracks already were. I'd been mapping them for months. An older man in a gray suit stood near the bar, nursing a drink he wasn't really drinking. He'd been at 3 events in a row now, always near the edges, never quite part of the crowd. I knew exactly who sent him. Agent Boone met my eyes once, briefly, then looked away. No nod. No signal. Just 2 people who understood each other without needing to perform it. Later that night, Celeste found me on the terrace. Her rose perfume drifted ahead of her, sweet and suffocating in the cold air. You could at least pretend to be happy for me, she said, swirling champagne she'd barely touched. I am happy for you, I said. You got exactly what you wanted. She smiled, satisfied, mistaking my calm for defeat. You always were too soft to fight for anything real. Maybe, I said. Or maybe I just know which fights are worth having. She laughed bright, careless, the laugh I used to hear right before I died. This time it didn't touch me at all. It just confirmed what I already knew. She had no idea what she'd just agreed to marry. Inside, Julian was talking to my father near the fireplace. Voice low, tone smooth as poured oil. I watched his hand rest on my father's shoulder, friendly, warm, the picture of a devoted future son-in-law. I knew that hand. I knew exactly what it was capable of when no one else was watching. Somewhere in a locked drawer in my room, upstairs, there was already a folder growing thicker by the week. Bank transfer patterns. Shipping manifests that didn't match cargo weights. A voice memo, recorded from behind a half-open door. Of Julian discussing a clean run with someone who never gave his name. None of it was finished yet. But it was enough to start. The party went on around me: champagne, laughter, candlelight flickering off diamond rings. Somewhere beneath all that shine, a clock had already started ticking, though only one person in the room could hear it. That was the last time I saw Celeste smile without knowing what was coming for her. Before the night ended, my father pulled me aside near the coat check. His grip on my arm was gentler than I remembered it being, in the version of this life I'd already lived once. You gave up a lot tonight, he said. The foundation. Julian. Are you sure you're all right? I'm better than all right, I said. I just want a different life than the one everyone expects me to want. He studied my face for a long moment, something almost like worry flickering behind his eyes. Your mother used to say things like that. Right before she left. I hadn't expected that. The comment landed somewhere old and tender, a bruise I didn't know I still carried. Maybe she was right to want something different, I said quietly. He didn't answer. He just squeezed my shoulder once and walked back toward the ballroom lights. I stood alone in the coat check hallway a moment longer, marble cool under my heels, distant laughter drifting through the walls like something happening in another life entirely. Somewhere upstairs, in my room, the folder waited. Growing. Patient. Exactly like me. The weeks after the engagement moved fast, the way things do right before they start to break. Celeste settled into her new role at the foundation with the confidence of someone who'd never once been told no. She redecorated the office. She hired 2 new assistants. She started signing checks with a flourish, like her name alone was collateral. I watched from a careful distance, working a job she didn't understand and didn't ask about. I'd taken a position at a small flower shop 3 neighborhoods away from the Hale estate. Modest hours, modest pay, dirt permanently under my fingernails. My father assumed it was a phase. Celeste assumed it was pathetic. Neither of them understood that I needed somewhere Julian's people wouldn't think to look. The shop smelled like wet stems and cut greenery, sharp and green and alive. My hands, soft ones, grew calloused from wire and thorns. I liked the ache. It reminded me I was really here, really breathing, really allowed a second chance most people never got. Sam, who owned the shop, didn't ask questions about the bruises I didn't have or the past I never explained. She just handed me coffee every morning and let me work in silence when I needed it. "You've got good hands for this," she said one afternoon, watching me wire a bouquet. "Steady. Most people shake on their first month." "I've had practice staying steady," I said. She didn't push. That was the kind of friend I needed, someone who let silence be an answer. Some evenings, after closing, Sam and I sat on overturned crates behind the shop, sharing a thermos of cheap coffee while the sky turned orange over the rooftops. The alley smelled like wet asphalt and distant rain. Somewhere down the block, a radio played through an open window, tinny and warm. "You ever think about going back?" Sam asked one night. "To that big house? That old life? Every day," I said. "That's exactly why I don't." She didn't ask what I meant. She just handed me the thermos and let the silence stretch, comfortable, easy, nothing like the silences I'd grown up with. Those evenings became a ritual I didn't know I needed until I had them. No calculation. No watching. Just two people, tired hands, cheap coffee, and a sky slowly darkening overhead. For an hour or two, most nights, I almost forgot I was building anything at all. Almost. Meanwhile, across town, Celeste was learning exactly how good her new life tasted. And exactly how much she liked the flavor of other people's fear. She fired 2 foundation employees who'd worked there for over a decade, replacing them with people who wouldn't question her spending. She canceled a scholarship program my grandmother had started, redirecting the funds toward a gala no one asked for. She told a reporter, on record, that the foundation was finally being run by someone with vision. I read that quote twice, in the newspaper, sitting on a cracked vinyl stool in the shop's back room. The paper smelled like cheap ink and old coffee rings. Vision. That was one word for it. I folded the paper and kept working. 3 weeks later, I ran into her outside a coffee shop near the foundation offices. She looked polished as ever, silk blouse, new heels, the ring catching sunlight every time she gestured. "Still playing with flowers?" she asked, eyeing my apron with something between pity and delight. "It suits me," I said. "It suits someone," she said, "who gave up everything without a fight." I smiled, small and even. "Maybe I just fight differently than you." She laughed. The sound sharp and bright, drawing a glance from a stranger walking past. "You don't fight at all, Ivy. That's your whole problem." I let her believe that. Beliefs like that were useful. They made people careless. That night, in my small rented apartment above a laundromat, I opened the folder again. The drawer stuck a little, swollen from humidity, and the smell of old paper and printer ink filled the room. I added a new page, a screenshot of a wire transfer, routed through 3 shell accounts, each one dissolving within days of receiving funds. I photographed it, saved it, backed it up twice. Somewhere in that quiet apartment, over the hum of the laundromat below, a plan kept growing teeth. 2 days later, I met with a lawyer named Mr. Price, in an office that smelled like leather chairs and stale coffee. The fluorescent light overhead buzzed faintly, uneven, like it might die at any moment. "You understand," he said, sliding papers across the desk, "that once we file this, there's no quiet way back." "I don't want a quiet way back," I said. I wanted airtight. He studied me for a long moment, the way people do when they're recalculating what kind of person they're dealing with. "Most clients your age come in here angry," he said. "You're not angry." "I've had time to get past angry," I said. "Now I'm just accurate." He almost smiled at that. Almost. We spent 2 hours going over documentation dates, account numbers, the language needed to make fraud unmistakable to a judge who wouldn't know either of us from strangers on the street. I signed where he told me to sign. My handwriting didn't shake once. When I left his office, the sun was already low, throwing long orange light across the sidewalk. I stood there for a second, letting it warm my face, thinking about how differently light used to feel back when I trusted people who didn't deserve it. That evening, I closed one more account, a small trust my father had set up in my name years ago, meant to keep me financially tied to the family. I moved the funds somewhere Celeste would never think to look. Somewhere Julian's people couldn't trace back to me if things moved faster than planned. She wouldn't notice for months. By the time she did, it wouldn't matter anymore. I didn't tell anyone what I was building. Not Sam. Not my father. Not even myself, out loud, in case saying it made it feel too real too soon. But every quiet action was another beam in a structure only I could see the shape of. Back at the estate, cracks were forming that had nothing to do with me yet. Celeste came home late one night, heels in her hand, mascara smudged beneath tired eyes. "Everything okay?" my father asked, looking up from his newspaper. "Fine," she said too fast. "Just a rough day at the foundation." I sat in the corner, pretending to read, watching her hands tremble slightly as she poured herself a drink. Something had rattled her. I didn't know what yet. I intended to find out. 2 nights later, I got my answer. I was walking home from the shop when I passed an alley behind Julian's building, a shortcut I'd taken a dozen times without incident. This time, I heard raised voices, low and tense, echoing off bricks still warm from the day. I stopped in the shadows, pulse steady, and listened. "You said the accounts were clean," a man's voice hissed. Not Julian's. Someone rougher. Angrier. "They are clean," Julian said, his voice controlled, but with an edge I recognized instantly. Fear, dressed up as calm. Then why is there a federal agent asking my cousin about shipping manifests? Silence. Heavy. Ugly silence. I stayed perfectly still, barely breathing, my phone already recording in my coat pocket. "I'll handle it," Julian finally said. "You'd better," the other voice growled. "Because if this comes back on us, you and your little fiancé go down first." Footsteps moved away, sharp against concrete. I waited a full minute before I dared to breathe normally again. The phone in my pocket felt warm, almost alive, holding on to every word. I hadn't planned this exact conversation, but it fit perfectly into the shape I'd already been building, proof, unprompted, that Julian's world was already starting to crack from the inside, even before I'd finished tightening my own grip from the outside. 2 attacks, converging. His own greed, and my patience. Neither of them saw it as a single storm yet. They would. A week later, Celeste hosted a dinner to celebrate her new title, acting co-director, printed on cream cardstock, delivered to 60 guests who all understood exactly what kind of night it was meant to be. I wasn't invited. I went anyway, as a favor from Sam's cousin, who worked catering for the event. I stood near the kitchen doors in a black uniform, tray balanced on my palm, watching Celeste hold court beneath the chandelier. Diamonds at her throat. Julian's hand at her waist. Laughter loud enough to fill the whole room. "To new beginnings," she said, raising her glass, rose perfume drifting warm through candlelight. "And to knowing exactly what you deserve." The guests laughed and drank. I refilled water glasses 2 tables away, invisible in the uniform, listening to every word she didn't know I could hear. "Where's Ivy tonight?" someone asked her, halfway through dessert. "Working," Celeste said, delighted. She always did prefer being useful to being important. More laughter. I set down a pitcher, steady hands, expression blank as glass. She had no idea how close useful and important were about to become. Later, in the kitchen, I overheard 2 board members speaking quietly near the pastry station, voices low beneath the clatter of dishes. "The transfer paperwork's been delayed again," one murmured. "Bank's asking odd questions." "Compliance thing, probably," the other said. "Nothing serious." I kept stacking dishes, saying nothing, letting the words settle into place like another stone in a wall only I could see forming. By the time I left that night, my feet ached and my uniform smelled like garlic and candle smoke. I didn't mind. Some nights, the best information comes dressed as invisible labor. That night, back in my apartment, I sat on the floor with my back against the bed, replaying the recording twice. My hands didn't shake, but something in my chest did. Old grief, old fear, surfacing briefly before I pushed it back down where it belonged. I closed my eyes for a second. Just a second. In that darkness, I smelled sandalwood again, sharp and sudden, though there was no one else in the room. A flash of marble floor. A flash of cold air on bare skin. A flash of laughter, fading into silence. I opened my eyes. The apartment smelled like laundry detergent and old coffee. Nothing else. That was the first time the past reached through and touched me since I woke up young again. It wouldn't be the last. I saved the recording under 3 different backups, then finally allowed myself to sleep. The next morning, Celeste called me an actual phone call, not a text, which told me something was already wrong in her world before I even answered. "I need to ask you something," she said, voice tighter than usual. "Weird question." "Okay," I said. "Do you know anything about Julian's shipping business? Like, anything strange?" For one long second, I let the silence stretch, savoring it more than I probably should have. "Why would I know anything about that?" I said. "I gave him to you, remember?" She exhaled, something between frustration and relief. "Right. Sorry. Just never mind." She hung up before I could say anything else. I stood there holding the phone, staring at the wall, feeling the first small tremor of the collapse I'd been engineering for months. She had no idea I was watching. She had no idea how long I'd been watching. Or how carefully. Somewhere across the city, a federal investigation was quietly widening its circle. Somewhere in my apartment, a folder kept growing thicker by the week. And somewhere inside Celeste, doubt had just planted its first seed, small, fragile, and completely unstoppable now that it existed. That night, I stood on my small balcony overlooking the alley, wind cold against my face, and allowed myself one honest thought. This was only the beginning. The first real blow landed on a Thursday, though Celeste wouldn't understand its size for another 2 days. My father called that morning, his voice unusually tight over the phone. "There's a problem with the transfer contract," he said. "The bank's holding it. Some kind of compliance flag." "That's strange," I said, keeping my voice even, curious, uninvolved. It wasn't strange at all. I'd spent 3 weeks feeding the right documents to the right people. Quietly. Patiently. Without ever putting my own name where it could be traced. That afternoon, one of Julian's business partners, a silent investor named Mr. Doyle, pulled his funding from the shipping company without warning. No explanation given. No meeting requested. Just a terse email and a closed door. I heard about it secondhand, from Sam, who'd heard it from a customer, who'd heard it from someone at the bank. Small city. Big mouths. That was one thread cut. There were others still waiting. 2 days later, Celeste showed up at the flower shop, still in her work clothes, mascara smudged beneath her eyes the way it had been the week before. This time, she didn't bother pretending everything was fine. "Did you know?" she demanded. Voice low. Sharp. Shaking slightly. "Know what?" I asked, wiping my hands on my apron. "About the investors pulling out. About the bank freezing things. Julian says it's nothing, but nobody just walks away from a shipping company for nothing." I looked at her, really looked, for the first time in weeks. Cracks had started showing under her makeup, faint lines of exhaustion no concealer could fully hide. "I told you," I said, "I don't know anything about his business." That part, technically, was true. I didn't know anything about his business. I knew everything about his crimes. There's a difference, and she still hadn't learned it. Before she left, she paused at the door, turning back with something sharp flickering in her eyes. "You know," she said, "Dad used to say you were the strong one. The steady one. Funny how strong looks a lot like invisible. From where I'm standing." "Funny how visible looks a lot like drowning," I said, "from where I'm standing." Her jaw tightened. She didn't have a comeback for that. She just turned and walked out, bell above the door jangling sharp behind her. She left the shop without buying anything, rose perfume trailing behind her, thinner now, like even her scent had started to fray at the edges. I watched her go and felt nothing close to guilt. Just a quiet, cold satisfaction settling into my chest like sediment at the bottom of still water. That night, my phone buzzed with a message from Agent Boone. Just 3 words. "We need to meet." We met the next evening in a diner outside the city, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like it had been sitting since morning. Fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting everything in flat, honest white. "You've been busy," he said, sliding into the booth across from me. "I've been patient," I said. "There's a difference." He opened a folder of his own, sliding it partway toward me. The recording you sent helped more than you know. We've got enough now to move on the shell accounts. Question is timing. How long? 2 weeks. Maybe 3. He studied me for a long moment. You sure you're ready for what happens when this breaks wide open? It won't just hit Vance, it'll hit the whole Hale Foundation. Your sister included. She's not my sister, I said quietly. Not really. And yes. I'm ready. He nodded slowly, like he understood something he didn't fully agree with, but respected anyway. There's something else, he added. Vance has been asking around about you. Quiet questions. Where you work. Who you talk to. My pulse ticked up, just slightly, cold moving through my chest. He's getting nervous, Boone said. Nervous men make mistakes. But they also get dangerous. I thought about sandalwood cologne. I thought about marble floors. I thought about the sound of Celeste's laughter. Fading into darkness. I know exactly how dangerous he gets, I said. Boone didn't ask what I meant. Some things didn't need explaining twice. I left the diner that night with the cold air biting at my face, streetlights flickering along wet pavement, my own reflection ghosting past me in dark shop windows. Somewhere behind me, footsteps echoed slow, deliberate, matching my pace exactly. I didn't turn around. I already knew who it was. Ivy, Julian's voice said, smooth as ever, though something underneath it had shifted. Small city, isn't it? Small enough, I said, stopping but not facing him fully. You've been quiet lately, he said. Working. Keeping to yourself. Very. Humble. I like my life simple, I said. He stepped closer, and the sandalwood hit me again, stronger this time, mixed with something sharper underneath sweat, maybe, or fear disguised as confidence. Simple lives don't usually attract federal attention. I turned to face him fully then, meeting his eyes without flinching. I wouldn't know anything about that. Wouldn't you? He said softly. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Just streetlight, cold air, and the distant sound of a car passing somewhere behind him. Take care of yourself, Ivy, he finally said, stepping back. Things are about to get complicated. Wouldn't want you caught in the middle of anything. He walked away, unhurried, exactly the way a man walks when he still believes he's in control. I stood there a long time after he left, letting my pulse settle, letting the old fear surface and pass through me like a wave instead of a wall. He thought he was warning me. He had no idea he was confirming everything I already knew. That night, alone in my apartment. The past reached through again, sharper this time. I closed my eyes and saw the balcony clearly. Marble cold under bare feet, city lights blurring below, Julian's cologne thick in the air seconds before hands pressed against my back. I opened my eyes fast, breathing hard, apartment silent around me except for the hum of the refrigerator. That memory used to end in falling. This time, it just ended in me, sitting upright, very much alive, very much ready. 2 weeks passed in careful, quiet motion. Documents moved between lawyers. Recordings moved between secure servers. Somewhere in a federal building I'd never see, a case number grew heavier with evidence every single day. Celeste's world, meanwhile, kept fraying thread by thread. A second investor pulled out. A society reporter quietly killed a flattering profile she'd been promised. An assistant quit without notice, taking sensitive files with her files. I happened to know exactly where they ended up. I ran into my father one evening in the kitchen, both of us reaching for the same kettle at the same time. Celeste's not herself lately, he said, concern creasing his forehead. Do you know what's going on with her? I think she's finding out life isn't as easy as it looked from the outside, I said. He studied me for a moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. You've changed, Ivy. Ever since you woke up sick that one morning, months ago. You're harder now. Maybe I finally grew up, I said. He didn't push further. Some truths, even fathers know not to chase too closely. A few weeks after the sentencing hearing, Agent Boone stopped by the flower shop, out of uniform, looking almost unfamiliar in a plain gray jacket. He bought a small bundle of white lilies he clearly had no plan for. Case is closed, he said, setting cash on the counter. Officially. Vance took a plea. 15 years, minimum. And Celeste? I asked. Wrapping the stems in brown paper. Probation. Community service. Testimony credit knocked most of the harsher charges down. He paused. You could have pushed for more. The evidence you gave us, we could have buried her too. I know. I said. Why didn't you? I thought about that question for a moment, turning it over carefully, the way I'd learned to turn over most things in this second life. Because the point was never to destroy her, I said. The point was to make sure the truth finally had somewhere to land. What happens after that isn't really about me anymore. Boone studied me for a long moment, something like respect settling behind his tired eyes. You're a strange kind of dangerous, Ivy Hale. I've been told, I said. He left with his lilies, and I never saw him again after that day. Though sometimes, months later, I'd catch a news segment mentioning his name attached to some other case, some other quiet unraveling somewhere else in the world. I hoped, wherever he was, he still remembered to bring flowers he had no plan for. I kept the lilies he almost forgot to take, wrapping them myself, setting them in a jar on my kitchen windowsill. They lasted 11 days, longer than most cut flowers do. I like to think that meant something, though I never quite decided what. That night, lying awake, I let myself answer one question I'd been avoiding since the beginning. Why hadn't I told him everything? Why hadn't I warned him outright? Because warnings require belief. And belief requires proof. I wasn't interested in almost winning this time. I wanted proof so complete that no one, not my father, not the press, not a courtroom, could ever look away from it. Somewhere out there, the machine I'd built kept turning, quiet and patient, exactly the way I designed it to. That same week, Celeste did something that finally showed everyone exactly what kind of person fear made her. Desperate for good press, she told a reporter that the Foundation's troubles traced back to a jealous family member with a grudge, no name given, but the implication was obvious to anyone who knew our family at all. By the next morning, half the city assumed she meant me. I found out from Sam, who slid the article across the counter without a word, her jaw tight with quiet anger on my behalf. I read it twice. Cold settled into my chest, not fear, just clarity. She had spent months mocking my choices, my job, my quiet life. Now she was trying to weaponize all of it, twisting my silence into something sinister, hoping the public would tear me apart before the truth ever reached her own doorstep. It didn't work. Not the way she wanted. 2 people who'd read the article recognized my name from the flower shop instead, and came in that same afternoon, curious, kind, asking gentle questions I didn't fully answer. No mob formed. No pitchforks. Just quiet, ordinary people, going about quiet, ordinary days. Celeste's cruelty, in the end, cost her more than it ever cost me. Reporters, sensing blood, started asking why a co-director would deflect blame onto an estranged sister instead of answering direct questions about her fiancé's finances. The spotlight she tried to redirect swung right back toward her, brighter than before. 3 days later, everything started moving faster than even I expected. Celeste showed up at my apartment, unannounced, mascara long gone, hair loose and unwashed. Her rose perfume had faded to almost nothing, just a ghost of what it used to be. They froze the Foundation's accounts, she said, voice cracking. This morning. Federal agents. In our office. I stood in the doorway, saying nothing, letting her keep talking. Julian says it's a mistake. He says his lawyers are handling it. But Ivy, her voice broke completely. I signed things. I signed things I didn't fully read. What if I go down with him? For the first time in 3 years, 3 lifetimes, I felt the full weight of the moment settle in my chest, not guilt, not quite satisfaction either. Something colder. Something closer to justice finally arriving on time. I don't know what to tell you, I said quietly. You wanted the seat. You wanted the ring. You got exactly what you were reaching for. She stared at me, something shifting behind her exhausted eyes, confusion, then dawning suspicion. You knew. She whispered. Didn't you? You knew something. From the start. I didn't answer. I just held the door a little wider and let the silence between us say everything I wasn't ready to say yet. She left without another word, footsteps unsteady on the stairs, rose perfume fading into the cold night air behind her. I closed the door, leaned my back against it, and finally allowed myself to breathe. My hands were shaking now, finally, after months of staying perfectly steady. I slid down until I sat on the floor, back against the cold door, staring at the small apartment I'd built out of nothing. Wire cutters on the counter. A half-finished bouquet in a jar of water. A folder, thick and heavy, waiting in the drawer beside my bed. I thought about the balcony again, the cold, the falling, the laughter that used to follow me into darkness. Then I thought about this room instead. Small, plain, entirely mine. I picked myself up off the floor slowly, legs unsteady, and walked to the window. Streetlights flickered on outside, one by one, gold against the darkening sky. The question wasn't answered. Not fully. Not yet. But it would be. Soon enough. The collapse came fast once it started, the way avalanches do, quiet for months, then suddenly all at once. 3 days after Celeste showed up at my door, the story broke wide open across every outlet in the city. Foundation director's fiancé under federal investigation for money laundering, the headline read. My father's foundation, his father's legacy, printed right there beneath the fold. I read it standing in the flower shop, the paper trembling slightly in my hands, not from fear. From something closer to relief. Sam glanced over my shoulder. Isn't that your sister's fiancé? Stepsister, I corrected quietly. And yes. She didn't ask anything else. She just squeezed my shoulder once and went back to the register. Within hours, everything moved. Agents seized the shell accounts. The foundation's remaining assets froze completely. A donor list, once glowing with pride, now scrambled to distance itself from the Hale name entirely. The bank called my father directly, informing him the contract transferring control to Celeste had been suspended pending investigation. I imagined his face when he heard it. I didn't need to see it to know exactly how pale it went. That same morning, a second domino fell. The gala planning committee, 6 women who had fought hard for their seats beside Celeste, resigned in a single joint statement, released to 3 different newspapers within the hour. We can no longer, in good conscience, lend our names to this foundation, the statement read. Celeste called each of them personally, I heard later. Not one picked up. By noon, a third domino fell. The venue holding Julian's shipping gala canceled the contract outright, citing reputational risk, refusing to refund the deposit. $40,000, gone, just like that. I pictured her staring at that cancellation email, coffee going cold beside her, hands starting to shake for the first time in months. By evening, the story had spread beyond finance sections. Cable news picked it up. A reporter camped outside the foundation offices, microphone ready, waiting for anyone willing to speak. Celeste wasn't willing. Celeste was gone. Holed up somewhere, refusing every call. Julian, on the other hand, made one mistake that sealed everything completely. He tried to move funds one final time. A last, desperate transfer meant to disappear before agents could freeze it fully. Agent Boone had been waiting for exactly that. The arrest happened outside his own building, cameras catching every second. Sandalwood cologne, sharp suit, hands cuffed behind his back, all of it broadcast within the hour, replayed on every screen in the city. I watched it once, standing in my apartment, arms crossed, saying nothing. His face, in that final frame before the cameras cut away, had changed completely. Lines I'd never noticed before cut deep beside his mouth. His eyes, once so controlled, darted from camera to camera like something cornered. The sandalwood cologne wouldn't show up on television, but I knew it was there, sharp and useless now, clinging to a suit he'd never wear again outside a courtroom. Somewhere behind him, in the crowd of reporters, I caught one clear glimpse of Celeste. No makeup. Hair unbrushed. A coat thrown on over pajamas, like she'd run out the door the second she heard the sirens. She wasn't smiling anymore. She wasn't laughing. The rose perfume, I imagined, had gone stale days ago, buried under sweat and fear and sleepless nights. I turned the television off before the segment ended. I didn't need to watch the rest to know how it finished. The reward Celeste had fought so hard to win had finally detonated exactly as designed. Not by accident. Not by luck. by the slow, patient architecture of a trap built 3 years and one death ago. 2 days later, she finally answered my call. "They're saying I knew," she said, voice raw, scraped down to nothing. "They're saying I helped him." "Did you?" I asked. "No. I just signed what he told me to sign. I trusted him." "You didn't trust him," I said quietly. "You trusted the ring. There's a difference." Silence stretched long on the line. Somewhere behind her, I could hear reporters shouting questions outside whatever building she was hiding in. "You knew," she finally said again, voice smaller this time. "Didn't you?" "From the very beginning." I closed my eyes, letting the moment settle fully before I spoke. "Meet me tomorrow," I said. "I'll explain everything." She agreed, quiet and defeated, and hung up without another word. I set the phone down slowly, hands steady, heart oddly calm. Tomorrow, I would finally close the loop I'd opened the moment I woke up young again, 3 years and one entire lifetime ago. That night, sleep didn't come easily. When it finally did, the past reached through one final time, not violent this time. Just clear. Marble floor. City lights. Sandalwood fading into cold night air. This time, in the dream, I didn't fall. I simply turned and walked away. I woke before dawn, dressed carefully, and drove to the one place that made sense for this conversation to happen: the foundation building itself. Empty now, stripped of donors, stripped of pretense, stripped down to what it always actually was. Celeste was already there when I arrived, sitting on the marble steps outside, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. No makeup. No jewelry. Just exhaustion and the faint, dying ghost of rose perfume still clinging to her coat. She looked up as I approached, eyes red-rimmed, voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me the truth," she said. "All of it. I need to hear it from you." I sat down beside her on the cold stone steps, the morning air sharp against my face, and finally let the whole truth rise to the surface. "You remember when I told Dad I didn't want the foundation," I said. "When I told you to take Julian, if you wanted him so badly." "I remember," she said. "I didn't give those things away because I didn't want them," I said. "I gave them away because I knew exactly what they were. I knew what Julian really was. I knew the foundation transfer would collapse the moment federal investigators started pulling threads." Her face went pale, understanding dawning slow and painful. "You knew from the beginning." "I knew from before the beginning," I said quietly. "In a life you don't remember, I married Julian instead of you. I found out what he really was. And he had me killed for it, off a balcony, 3 years from now, in a future that doesn't exist anymore." She stared at me, disbelief warring with something closer to horror. "That's insane." "That's not. I don't need you to believe it," I said. "I just need you to understand this part. Everything you took from me, I handed to you on purpose. Every step you took toward that ring, that seat, that life, you walked it yourself. I only built the road." Her hands trembled in her lap. "Why? Why do this to me?" I looked at her for a long moment, cold morning light catching every exhausted line on her face. "Because you helped kill me once," I said. "In a life only I remember. And some debts don't disappear just because no one else remembers they exist." She started to cry, then quiet, broken, nothing like the bright laughter I remembered from that balcony. I didn't move to comfort her. That part of me had died 3 years ago. On cold concrete. And it hadn't come back with the rest of me. "What happens to me now?" she whispered. "That's not up to me anymore," I said. "It's up to the evidence. It's up to the truth." I only made sure the truth had somewhere to land. I stood, brushing off my coat, looking down at her one final time. "I'm not going to forgive you," I said. "And I'm not going to gloat either. I'm just going to walk away now. And let you live with exactly what you built." I turned and walked down the marble steps, morning light spilling gold across the empty street, her quiet crying fading slowly behind me. That was the last real conversation we ever had. I didn't go straight home. I drove instead to the small cemetery on the edge of town, where my grandmother was buried beneath an old oak tree. I hadn't visited since waking up young again. Some part of me hadn't been ready. The grass was damp under my shoes. Morning dew soaked through the hem of my coat. I knelt beside the headstone, tracing her name with 2 fingers, feeling the cold stone bite into my skin. I did it, I said quietly. To no one. To everyone. I don't know if it was right. But I did it. The wind moved through the oak leaves above me, soft and steady, like an answer that didn't need words. I sat there a long time, longer than I meant to, letting the morning settle into my bones. When I finally stood, my knees ached and my hands were stained faintly green from the grass. I didn't mind. It felt like proof of something. Proof that I was still here, still real, still allowed to feel the ground beneath me. On the drive home, my phone rang. My father's name lit up the screen. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I answered. I saw the news, he said. Voice hoarse, unsteady. About Celeste. About Julian. Is it true? What they're saying? That you knew? I gripped the wheel a little tighter, eyes on the road ahead. I suspected, I said carefully. I didn't have proof until recently. It wasn't the whole truth. It was the only version he could survive hearing. Why didn't you tell me? He asked. And for the first time in either of my lives, I heard something like real hurt in his voice. Because you would have tried to protect her, I said. And that would have given them time to hide everything. I couldn't risk it. Silence stretched across the line, heavy, uneven. I'm proud of you. He finally said. And I don't fully understand you. Both things are true at once. That's fair, I said. Most days, I don't fully understand myself either. He laughed, soft and tired, the first real laugh I'd heard from him in months. It cracked something loose in my chest, something I hadn't realized I'd been holding so tightly. The days that followed moved slower, softer, like the whole city had finally exhaled after holding its breath for months. Julian's case moved through the courts with the kind of grinding certainty that evidence like mine guarantees. Celeste testified, cooperating fully once she understood cooperation was the only door still open to her. She avoided prison. Barely. A plea deal, community service, a fine large enough to finally strip the last of her inherited comfort away. The foundation itself dissolved quietly, its remaining assets redirected to the scholarship program she'd once canceled without a second thought. My father recovered slowly from the scandal, though something in him stayed permanently dimmed, like a lamp that had blown one filament too many. I visited him sometimes, brought him flowers from the shop, sat with him in silence more often than conversation. He never fully understood what I'd done, or why. I never fully explained it. Some truths are kinder left as mystery. I kept working at the flower shop for another year, hands steady, calloused, alive. Sam eventually made me a partner, and together we expanded into the empty storefront next door. I built something quiet there. Something real. Something no one could steal from me twice. One afternoon, almost a year after the arrests, I walked past the old estate. Now sold, now belonging to strangers who had no idea what its walls had once witnessed. I stood outside the gate for a moment, wind moving softly through the trees, sunlight warm against my face. I thought about the balcony. I thought about the fall. I thought about waking up young again. With borrowed time and a debt only I remembered. The debt was paid now. Fully. Completely. I turned and walked away, dirt still faintly staining the creases of my palms, sunlight warm on my shoulders, wind carrying the smell of cut grass instead of rose perfume or sandalwood. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, nothing followed me into the dark. I went back to the shop that afternoon, hands stained with dirt and pollen, apron tied loose around my waist. Sam looked up from the register, smiled, and slid a fresh thermos of coffee across the counter without a word. We sat outside again that evening, crates beneath us, sky bleeding orange into violet above the rooftops. The radio played somewhere down the block, faint and warm. For the first time since waking up young again, I let myself simply exist in a moment without measuring its usefulness. You look lighter, Sam said, studying me over the rim of her cup. I feel lighter, I said. And I meant it. Fully. For the first time in longer than I could remember. The seasons turned the way seasons do, indifferent to everything either of us had survived. Spring came, then summer, then a long golden autumn that painted the whole street in amber light. I planted a small garden behind my apartment, nothing fancy, just herbs and a few stubborn roses that refused to die no matter how badly I neglected them. I laughed. The first time I noticed the roses blooming despite my carelessness. Some things, apparently, survive no matter who's tending them. I still think about that balcony sometimes. The cold concrete. The warmth leaving my body faster than I expected. I don't regret what I built afterward. I don't regret the patience, the silence, the years spent letting other people believe they'd won. Revenge isn't loud. It isn't even fast. It's just patient enough to wait for the right morning, and precise enough to know exactly where to stand when the truth finally lands. People sometimes ask me, when they learn small pieces of this story, whether I feel free now. It's a strange question. Freedom, I've learned, doesn't arrive all at once, like a door swinging open. It arrives slowly, in small unremarkable moments: dirt under fingernails, coffee shared on overturned crates, a rose blooming despite my neglect. I don't wake up flinching anymore. I don't smell sandalwood and brace for a hand against my back. Most mornings now, I just smell coffee, and cut stems, and the particular green scent of a life I built entirely on my own terms. That's the part no headline ever captured. Not the arrests. Not the collapse. Just an ordinary woman, tending an ordinary garden, finally allowed to be nothing more than herself. If you were me, would you have saved her, or walked away? Tell me in the comments. Where are you watching from?